Hails and welcome to Rauta's ZINE reviews. As it is, I've reviewed a couple of earlier issues of Bardo Methodology Underground Metal Zine. Issues number 2, 3, and 4. And now it's time for issue number 5, which I think came out in spring 2019, and I've been kind of a slow reader once again with this one because I have to read somewhat for my work, and there are other things which I do, so I'm kind of a slow reader. I also had a book. These are my excuses not delivering this review earlier than this, but nevertheless here it is. And as it is, I'm also reading currently issue number 1, which is a reissue, so all five first ones will be totally covered here on Rauta. But let's just stick to this number now, will we? So, as you can see, this is quite a thick of an opus here. Very nice in design as always. It seems like Bardo pretty much evolved quite quickly into a level of high quality that is in zine format. That is obviously also a website. And if you're a newcomer, rest assured, I will tell you the basic stuff before going into details of this particular issue. So what we have here is eventually almost 70 pages, or roughly 70 pages, including covers of underground metal, but not only that. What is this paper, this zine, first of all? Well, it's not enough if I say this is an underground metal zine, because there are other topics in all of these issues pretty much, but it's very much into the occult, into some psychedelics, sometimes science, sometimes witchcraft, magic, things that are kind of related to each other, but not necessarily so obvious way. It's kind of hard to just give any common denominator, except that some of these, or most of these topics are more or less related to underground metal. But I wouldn't go as far to say it's a black metal scene. It's not even an extreme metal scene, only because there are other topics. Yes, most of the bands, I guess, would be labeled as extreme metal, being death metal or black metal mostly. But there are the topics. There are journalists being interviewed, there are science people being interviewed, there are shamans and other curious people interviewed throughout the pages of different issues, and Bardo Methodology number 5 is no exception. Let's start to take a look on the one of the last pages of this issue, which is the index. As you can see, there are bands like Blasphemy, telling very down-to-earth story, history and otherwise of the band. Then we have bands like Rauta, which are more mystical breed. Then Clandestine Blaze from Finland. That is not only about the band, it's also about the band Mikko Aspa behind the band and his label Northern Heritage. Then just skip a little bit. Then we have a black metal label Nuclear War Now. We have a book author who has written Cult Never Dies. Then we have Martial Industrial Act Rome. And then we have this weird Russian kind of throat chanting chat people called Furpa, which was also featured, by the way, in issue number 1. So this is kind of a continuation, and that is not a rare thing with Bardo, because in previous issues there have been interviews that has been like divided into issues like 2 and 3 and so forth. So it's kind of an interesting thing. Now this is a zine full of interesting pictures. Sometimes they're just photos, like this one here. I can't even point properly. Sometimes drawn images. And as you can see, this font here is pretty small. I was actually having a talk that some people might find this way too small to read without glasses. Luckily, I'm not one of them, but I mean, it's kind of a solid point. And as you can see, there are very interesting images here. Some are more or less history related. Some of them are more mystic in nature, some just plain metal. Then actually some of these issues, if you have the first 300 copies or so, you will have posters. That has been a kind of ongoing thing with the Bardo issues. So those who are first timers don't know what to expect, and those who have been reading other issues pretty much know what's going on here, because Bardo methodology is all about having proper background check. It's very different work ethics, and in a good way, from mine, because Mr. Göransson, the main guy, the only guy basically apart from the art, he always dives deep into these issues. He reads previous interviews, he asks questions based on that or how they were answered. So there's lots of background information already within when these are written and or even asked. So it's a very, very deep delving way of journalism. These are way more proper questions than so many, let's call them kind of a cheap ass underground zines, which are like, hey, hello from Brazil, how is your first album? Do you like to play gigs? Do you like to play electric guitar? Do you like play drums? Do you like to write poems about Satan? These are not the type of questions or topics or conversations what you find within these pages. These are more intellectual. I could say might be too intellectual for some. They might be too deep diving topics and questions and whatever, because I mean it's all about changing the aspect for the band or whoever is being interviewed. I mean they're all very different from one another. I mean if you read for example Blasphemy interview, it's totally different in nature than Purba or even Nuclear War Now. I mean it depends whether the band is more about kind of a how to put it, more mundane, more rural than whether it's kind of academic or whether it's about mysticism and occult witchcraft, sorcery, you name it. So once again, Bardo issue number 5 delivers quality. It delivers it in a brilliant way, but this isn't my favorite of all the mysteries. And I guess it comes down on these artists in question. I mean, it obviously depends what artists or bands just, how they answer, how they reply to the questions and topics talked. And while I was enjoying a lot of this issue as well, I think some of the previous ones were more to my liking. Maybe because they had something more, in my opinion, with to be interesting. Sometimes it just takes a couple of a couple of bands which are more interesting in nature. I think it was number 4 where there was like bands like Catatonia and Theory and whatever. And even though they are not all my favorite bands, they had so much more issues and concerns which are interesting to me rather than some of the topics, in this particular issue. For example, Rome was kind of a nice to read, but then again, it's not a band that I enjoy as such in music, nor I'm not that interested in its history than, for example, Blasphemy. So I mean, it totally depends. So when I say number 5 is not that interesting than, for example, number 4, it doesn't mean it's gonna be that to you. The only thing which I really have to complain, and even that is kind of a small thing, is that if we take a look at this, is just a good example of a 2-page layout. You don't have any of those kind of a lines. I mean, like if you're a reader much like me, like you read like half a page here and another half page there, or even full page, you might have some kind of they're not headlines, but more paragraphs in the sense like, okay, I will just read here, and when the next question or next topic kind of comes into play, I will just stop there. I mean, there are questions or bolded parts like this, but they are too scarce. I mean, like here you get only one of these. These are not like big things, but for the sake of readability, that is one thing I would like to change. For the font, like I said, it's all about your eyes or glasses, whether or not you can read this small font. Like I said, if I bring close enough, obviously you can read it, but make no mistake, these are the full 2 pages, so it's quite a lot to read. So with these almost 70 pages, being big A4 size pages, and this little font, this is as much to read as a pocketbook, you know, the soft cover type. So this is not something you read over taking a poop in a toilet, or, you know, your typical bus drive, commuting or whatever. But at least it's worth the money. All the interviews are interesting. I've read every issue except the first one, which I'm still in the middle of work. I've read all of them from cover to cover, which is not something that I do with all of them magazines in the world, obviously, which I keep reading. So that should tell you a lot about this quality and the interesting topics these issues have. So if you have enjoyed the other issues, put your order there and get yourself this number 5 and maybe earlier issues as well. And if you don't know where to start, it doesn't really matter. You can pretty much go from 1 or 5. It doesn't matter because they are different things. And even if you read 5 first and then go to 1 and you have Purba interview there, it doesn't really matter. You can get a hold of the whole thing even in that particular order. So, Bardo is the best thing what seems to be going in the world of metal zines. What can I say? 5-star thing. That's my opinion. Now do yourself a favor and get some reading, and hope you enjoy.